Given the deeply troubling state of our world today, particularly in the Middle East, in the land of Israel, Palestine, when we start talking about who owns the land and who has to get exterminated in order to occupy land, we are obviously entering very, very difficult territory. I don't have any particular solutions to the crisis in Israel and Gaza for you today. What I do have is a little bit of time travel back in time a few thousand years into the Hebrew Bible, where we encounter maybe one of the most troubling, maybe one of the most fearsome, maybe one of the most hard to ethically integrate concepts in the entire Old Testament. This is the concept of what in Hebrew is called the HEREM, or the verbal form haram, the ban, or the total annihilation, or the removal of an object, a place, some material thing, or a person, or an entire people group from any kind of profane, that is to say, non-holy use, which is to say, this may involve the killing of people and the burning of things, and even the killing of animals, completely to set something outside of everyday normal use. Harem. I mean, it's associated with the word harem, as we might use it to talk about like a king's group of wives and concubines, the king's harem. It's a group set aside, not for everyday use and not for everyone's use, only for the king. So I tread carefully into this topic, and yet we must go boldly. This topic comes up, I think a little under 50 times is this word harem or haram used in the Hebrew Bible. It comes up first, I think, in Exodus, comes up in Leviticus, but really some of the more programmatic texts giving the reader instructions about the harem, about this type of holy war institution, come in the book of Deuteronomy. For example, Deuteronomy 7 begins this way. When the Lord your God brings you into the land that you are about to enter and occupy, and he clears away many nations before you, the Hittites, the Girgashites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, 7 nations mightier and more numerous than you. And when the Lord your God gives them over to you and you defeat them, then you must utterly haram them in Hebrew. You must utterly destroy them, the NRSV translates it. Make no covenant with them and show them no mercy. Do not intermarry with them. Do not follow their gods. Completely destroy their things. Complete annihilation. This comes up again in Deuteronomy 13, again in Deuteronomy 20, right as Israel is perched at the edge of the land. Israel then enters the land in the book of Joshua. Joshua, what a wild book that is. They come and they take the land, and they institute this practice of the harem. Most famously, and first of all, of course, at Jericho, where the walls come tumbling down, according to the children's song, kind of a violent song. This is Joshua chapter 6, verse 15. On the 7th day they rose early at dawn and marched around the city in the same manner 7 times. It was only on that day that they marched around the city 7 times. And at the 7th time, when the priests had blown the trumpets, Joshua said to the people, "Shout, for the Lord has given you the city. The city and all that is in it shall be harem, shall be harammed, shall be devoted to the Lord for destruction." And they go in and do this, except somebody violates it in the very next chapter, 7:1. But the Israelites broke faith in regard to the harem, the devoted things. Achan, son of Carmi, son of Zavdi, son of Zerah, took some of the harem items, the devoted things, and the anger of the Lord burned against Israel. And thus, Achan and his family, they are annihilated for violating the annihilation, the ban. Are they able to carry this out on the entire land? A long story could be told here as we go through the biblical text. The answer, though, seems to be no. Even within the book of Joshua itself, we read several references to the fact that Israel was not able to carry this out or didn't carry it out, even as we also read passages like Joshua chapter 12, which seem to suggest a kind of totalizing list of names of places where they do carry it out. So did they do it or did they not do it? Then by the time we get into the book of Judges, the first 3 chapters of Judges, which are a fascinating 3 chapters to read and worthy of totally separate analysis from what we can give it here. They then go back and they kind of like reanalyze the book of Joshua in a way, explaining why the Israelites are still dealing with these people in the land, even though they were supposed to haram them, according to Deuteronomy, and even though the book of Joshua seems to say that they did do so, while also admitting in parts that they did not do so, by giving sort of theological justifications, maybe that the people were left there because Israel failed to carry out the HEREM, the institution. All right. But then there's another explanation, which is that maybe they are there to serve as a test for Israel, to see whether they will obey the Lord their God, which makes it almost sound intentional, like the Lord left them there for the testing purpose. Then there's another explanation that in fact they are left there in order to teach a new generation of Israel warfare, because you have to fight against somebody, and if the whole land has been cleared of your enemies, whom are you fighting against? They're going to go soft. I think that's the idea. So even here, I mean, that's a very quick summary of what could be unpacked at great length. We see tension. We see tension. This is not mean scholar man criticizing the Bible here, finding contradictions. I'm just trying to come to terms with the text itself and what it says about whether Israel actually carries out the HEREM, whether they actually do this haram activity to the full extent that Deuteronomy says that they are to do it. The answer, according to the Bible, seems to be no, that they do not do it, right? That they're not able to do it. But this is an interesting thing. Of course, scholars will try to solve these problems by positing multiple sources. And surely there are multiple sources and multiple authors at play. Historians may look back and say there's a confused historical situation here. From a theological perspective, you could look at it and say there's evidence of just ambiguity, maybe of ambivalence around this idea. Or maybe just the problem of the book of Joshua, assuming it's earlier than Judges or some of the other books, claiming that this happened while Israel still knows it's dealing with Canaanites or these other people in its midst. Okay, I don't have a perfect example for that one. Now, the big issue here for readers, of course, has been the ethical problem, especially for Christian readers, for faithful Jewish readers, for theologically inclined readers of any tradition, who have any kind of sensitivity around violence. How can God command such a thing? There are a lot of apologetic works on this. I confess that as a Christian reader, I found them less than satisfying at points, less than satisfying indeed for various reasons. There just seems to be some kind of violent mystery at the heart of this that almost resists satisfying explanation. Maybe just for me, I don't know. You can tell me what you think in the comments. I know that there are a lot of resources out there. I will say this. It might be comforting to you to know that ancient Israel apparently didn't invent this institution of the total annihilation, holy war style of thing. Why do I say this? Well, I say this because we have inscriptional and linguistic evidence from the ancient Near Eastern world generally that others practiced styles of warfare that could be more or less similar to this. For example, from the so-called Mari texts at Mari from the 18th century BCE, this is roughly the time of Hammurabi, we'll have a bunch of texts from a city, Mari, which is north of Babylon, in Babylonia. And there we read of a certain institution called the Asaku in Akkadian. And, there's a story there or a situation which seems to maybe similar to Joshua chapter 7, this violation of the ban, the HEREM there. And so scholars have pointed to that as maybe a parallel institution. The most famous place, though, that scholars have gone to point to a parallel has been to this inscription called the Mesha Stela, or the Moabite stone. Dates to about 840 BCE. So if you were to think of the book of Joshua in historical terms, and maybe we shouldn't, but I'll just put it in history and say maybe 1200 BCE, okay? This would be 400 years after that for sure. But of course, the book of Joshua, in the earliest forms we have it, is not from 840 BCE. I mean, we don't really know when any of this was written or what kind of historical reality it represents or doesn't represent. That's a tough conversation. But this Moabite stela really does seem to be from 840 BCE. So it makes it a very ancient contemporaneous reference in vis-a-vis the biblical world to all kinds of things. In fact, this Mesha Stela is narrating. I find this in a volume called The Context of Scripture. This is the kind of stuff you can read. You can probably look it up on the internet. The inscription begins, I am Mesha, that's the king, son of Chemosh, that's the deity, the king of Moab. He talks about how he was king and the kind of stuff that he did. He actually mentions an Israelite king, Omri. He mentions Israel several times, a bunch of times, and mentions battles with Israel. This makes the Moabite stela one of the earliest textual sources we have that actually mentions Israel. It's not the earliest. The earliest generally recognizes the so-called Merneptah stela from about 1200 BCE. But this is pretty early. I mean, this is pretty early. This is good stuff. At least shows that Israel wasn't completely fabricated out of thin air, at least by that name, at least by the 840s BCE, because what the heck is this guy Mesha from Moab talking about? He's talking about all kinds of battles. He's really obsessed with Israel, actually, in the stela. And this is the only surviving major inscription we have from the Moabites in this kind of format. So, and really the only major evidence we have for the Moabite language, which is very similar to Hebrew in some ways. It's a kind of a cognate Northwest Semitic language. He talks about doing various things, killing people, sacrificing people, killing people. Ah, yes, here's the key line. And Chemosh, his deity, said to me, go, take Nebo from Israel, Nebo being a town. And I went into the night and I fought against it from the break of dawn until noon, and I took it and I killed its whole population, 7,000 male citizens and aliens and female citizens and aliens and servant girls, for I had put it to the ban for Ashtar Chemosh. And from there I took the vessels of the Lord, or Yahweh. Actually, this is one of the earliest references we have to Israel's God by the divine name Yahweh, Yod-He, Vav-He, the Lord. And I hauled them before the face of Chemosh. But that phrase, the ban there, in the Moabite language, has that same consonantal system, chet, rash, mem, as Hebrew. So it's the same verbal type root that's used here to describe this. So here he's bragging about doing it, okay. There also are apparently classical Greek parallels to this concept of items that are devoted to the deity and are not to be taken as plunder for profane use, and also Roman parallels as well. So this is the idea. When Israel is to go into this land, it's not merely to plunder these people in these particular places. And there's some distinction and some details around here about where Israel is to do the HEREM and where they're not, and where they can take slaves and where they can't, and so on. But the HEREM is a very particular idea. You devote it to destruction. You almost offer it up as a sacrifice, as something holy that cannot just be used. So not just taking people's gold. Perhaps someone could find ethical comfort in that idea. Maybe it's a kind of twisted or backward logic, but nevertheless, that in fact the people are not just enslaved and their goods are not taken, but rather all of this must be destroyed. This is why Achan in Joshua chapter 7 is punished. In fact, I grab another source here, conveniently on the ground next to me. The Dictionary of Deities and Demons in the Bible. They have an entry on the HEREM here. I like this resource. I've used it for a lot of things throughout the years. Dictionary of Deities and Demons in the Bible, edited by Carl Vander Toorn, Bob Becking, and Peter Vanderhorst. Just all the words, like Elohim, all the divine names you see in the Bible. Hadad, there's an entry for demon. Dagon, deity of the Philistines. Calf, as in the golden calf. Azazel, Leviticus 16. Anat, Asherah, and so on. So it's a good resource for that sort of thing. I don't know if it's been updated since I bought this, but anyway, the entry here on the HEREM or taboo points out, interestingly, that in the Old Testament, this concept of HEREM has 3 applications. One being the HEREM of an entire community. This is the kind of thing that Joshua carries out or tries to carry out on the land. The HEREM of an individual, and excommunication or ostracizing. All of them derive from the basic idea of separation and transfer to an outside sphere. And then a third usage, indicating removal or expulsion, which the author here thinks is tied to more later texts in the Second Temple period. The author writes, "A human, therefore, may not enjoy the use of an object designated as HEREM, for this would transgress the limits between his domain, with its protective socio-legal organization, and the outside non-classificatory domain, and cause disequilibrium to encroach upon the former. Should such misuse occur, Joshua 7, the perpetrator himself becomes contaminated by the object of the herem and must be subjected to the same treatment as that object in order to ward off the consequent dangers to his community. I felt really unsettled by seeing the news about these rocket exchanges between Israel and Iran, between, of course, this entire Gaza invasion and war, between this whole Hezbollah thing. I confess, I have no wise words about a solution to any problem in the Middle East, much less for Israel and Palestine. I probably, like any good moderate liberal person, support a two-state solution. But I guess this idea of the herem had been rattling around in my mind as I think about contemporary events and the way that these events reverberate into our contemporary world. And do they reverberate into the contemporary religious imagination of people today living in Israel, Palestine? These events from Deuteronomy and Joshua? Oh, yes, they do. Oh, yes, they do. And they're invoked by religious people who live there, and they have been ever since the creation of the state of Israel. I guess I'll leave this without any kind of neat solution then, except to say, a troubling concept for sure, but hopefully we can at least learn something new about the type of language that's used and the kind of parallels or antecedents to this kind of language that we find in ancient Israel's context.